Good day, everyone. Welcome back to the Doc of Detox show. My guest today is Dr. Michael Finkelstein. We were on last night, and the show went on, and we told you to get your questions ready. Well, guess what? We've got about 14 questions here today, and we're going to take your questions live. We're going to take your questions live on Facebook, Instagram, and also on YouTube. So if you have any questions while the show is on, feel free to send those in. They'll be sent to my phone. And we will take your questions first and foremost, and we'll make sure that they're answered by Dr. Michael Finkelstein. Dr. Michael Finkelstein, okay, he wrote a best-selling book called Slow Medicine, okay? Now understand something. Think about this. Slow medicine. What is he telling everybody? He's telling everybody to connect to their breath and calm down. Just calm down. Let's look at doing emergency care when we need it. Let's don't continually do emergency care all the time, or else guess what? We'll all become an emergency. So we're not going to call 911 unless it is, but I'll tell you who we're going to call. We're going to call in Dr. Michael Finkelstein right now, and he's going to tell you all about his best-selling book, okay, Slow Medicine. And he's going to give you a little bit of his background if you missed it yesterday on who he is, what he's done, and where he's going. Good day, Dr. Michael Finkelstein. How are you?
Well, I'm very well, thank you. Great to be with you again.
Great. So for those people who didn't see you, can you just give a little bit of your background and just let them know what it is you're doing now and what is your plan for the future and what you would like to see for health today? Okay?
All right, yep. All right, so simply, I started off as a traditional conventional doctor, MD. I went to school pretty much when I graduated college. That was my plan when I was a young kid, and really just went straight through. I had no problems, with the medicine at that time. This was now almost 30 years ago. But when I was practicing after, well, 10 or 15 years, I realized that Western medicine was really quite limited. And I was really aching to learn more and to be more helpful than with just the tools that I was acquiring through the conventional medical way. So I went back to study with Andrew Weil at the University of Arizona College of Medicine. And he had a program called the Program in Integrative Medicine. So I basically did a 2-year distance learning fellowship where I studied all about other systems of health and healing and really retooled myself, reshaped my abilities to see people as not just bodies and machines that had parts, but whole living systems and with a consciousness. Something about our lives are much more than our body to begin with. And that was the philosophy I had all along, but I was in my training got sort of separated from my own truth. Anyway, I wound up being able to combine these two things. So now I practice internal medicine and integrative medicine. And I live and work on a small farm about 50 miles outside of New York City because I found that clinical environments, like the hospital where I was along the way, the medical director, I found that people come to hospitals when they're acutely ill, and that's where medicine really perhaps does well for us. However, between those visits to a hospital, and of course nobody wants to go to a hospital, people are home, they're home. And it seemed to me that the best environment for me to practice was my own and to show people how I lived as a model for the type of advice I was giving. So I have this small working farm, 50 miles, as I said, outside of New York City, which is pretty rural considering how close it is to a big metropolitan area. And it's where I show people what life in balance looks like. And that's more or less what I'm trying to share and try to help people embrace so that they can piece together all the facets of their lives into one coherent plan.
Beautiful. We just got a message in from Facebook. Okay, Susan from Toronto. Why do you think we choose, Dr. Finkelstein, why do you think we choose to self-sabotage and live this fast-paced life? And is that what made you write the book, Slow Medicine?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. Exactly. I realized that if you want to sort of in a nutshell encapsulate why people are so sick right now, even though all this technology exists and we should be healthier, I think it's the fast world. And I said to myself, if the fast is the disease, then slow is the medicine. And what I meant by that is not to go slow like a turtle and wander aimlessly and barely get there, but to correct the intensity that we're bombarded with and to come into a state of better balance and harmony. And so, yes, the underpinning of my work is to help people get out of the fight or flight response into the more parasympathetic state of resting, digesting, and as you said in the introduction about breathing, getting back in touch with our breath, which physiologically is interesting because the vagus nerve, which sits among other places in our diaphragm, when we take a deep breath, we stimulate the ends of the vagus nerve and it slows down and turns off the sympathetic nervous system. So the prototypical practice for my work is a deep breath. And so, yeah, the question is really accurate because that's what dawned on me. And that's what I think we need more of. We need to help people see that they actually have the power, maybe more than anyone else, to correct a lot of the accumulating forces that lead to the ailments that they wind up getting. And it's interesting, people are educated differently in the West in particular, that when they have anything from a sore throat to a rash, they immediately jump to a doctor. And sometimes that's important because sometimes sore throats and rashes are the beginning of something quite serious. But as most people realize, that's rarely the case. And for much of what ails us, even some of the more serious conditions, if we learn to take better care of ourselves along the way, we would have a better response. We would need to do less Western medicine and we would live our lives more fully.
Beautiful. She has a second part she just sent in.
Good.
What is it in us psychologically that gets us addicted to all this chaos?
In a word, fear. The idea that we are losing things all the time, or we don't have enough, or we're going to get sick or die, motivates us to try to remedy those problems. When that's the framing, life is here to be lost. Then whenever we have a sign or symptom of things that are deteriorating, we get anxious. And in our anxiety states, we reach for something that seems solid. We've been taught then simultaneously that solid is institutions of science in the case of health. And we go there thinking, and occasionally correctly, that there's something in those buildings that could save our lives. I mean, as I said, you have a heart attack, go to a hospital. You have a major car accident, a hospital is where you want to be. But for the stuff that we experience day to day, which is minor by comparison, we still are in that somewhat of a habit because that's how we're trained and that's what's reinforced in the public space, as opposed to what we can learn to do for ourselves. And it is a little bit of addiction. Fear creates the desire for safety. And when we have something that soothes us, I'm sorry, my microphone keeps falling out of my ear. We have something that soothes us, we learn quite quickly to go to it again. And, I wanted to be a doctor when I was 7 years old. Why? One, my grandmother told me I should be a doctor. But two, the pediatrician that I had at the time was a wonderful man. I went into his home. It was the first floor of his brownstone in Queens, New York. It was just a warm, cozy place. And he was a nice, lovely man. And I felt good there. And so when my mother did take me when I had a sore throat, seeing the doctor just felt that was a nice experience for me. It was healing. But little did I know at the time that the healing was the man himself, not necessarily the medicines, that the medicine was the man.
Beautiful.
And, that's what I think we need more of. We need to return to that. And it turns out that we don't always need doctors to provide that. In fact, the person you see in the mirror every morning is your best doctor.
So basically, you went to a medicine man.
Yeah, and you think about the word medicine man and what that means. And what even medicine, how we define medicine. Right now in the West, we define medicine as a substance that we take outside of ourselves, as opposed to the way medicine was used by indigenous people in North America, where it was a way of living. That was the medicine. It was the right road. It was the way we lived our lives. When we do that well, not only does our body respond, but our whole life is illuminated and we thrive.
Thank you, Michael. So everybody out there on Instagram, Facebook, and also YouTube, this show will be timestamped. So when your questions come in, you'll be able to go right to YouTube, and you'll see that we're going to timestamp everything. So you can just go, if you happen to miss the show, you can, or you missed something, you'll be able to go back and do that. Joyce, okay, from YouTube. Joyce from Minnesota. In the show, you said you believe there will be a tipping point. What does that look like to you, and how close do you believe we are at that tipping point?
That's also a good question. I really don't know how close we are. I'd like to believe we're getting there. I think the more people who are conscious and conscious of their consciousness and aware of the effects of their mind when aligned with principles of light and love is incredibly powerful. So powerful that it could literally send so much biophotonic energy, as I spoke about yesterday, into the atmosphere, into the world around us, into this biofield. And that can create tremendous effects down current. I think it's a critical mass moment. And that's why I am so pleased to be on a show like this and to reach out to people. Because the more people who hear it, the more people who embrace it, I think that's when we'll get there. And I don't really know when it is. I am just going to keep trying and driving to get to that point with as many people who I can influence and inspire, perhaps, to take this on, which is basically to visualize the power of their beauty, of their light, and to seek it and to resonate with others who are doing the same. The first part of the question, which is how do we get there, essentially is by understanding what we're trying to tip. If the goal, as an example, is longevity, we want to all get to be 120 years old, and that will be the good day when that all happens. And I don't want to get too distracted or derailed by that. But if we all live to be 120, let's say 30% longer than we do now, we would have compounding problems of food scarcity or resource utilization or waste production, and if we go all the way we are now. So it may not be a great solution. Maybe for those people who are, older now, they want to live another 30 years. I get that. On the other hand, we have to think carefully about what the goal is. I don't think that's the goal. I think the quality of our life is the goal. The meaning and purpose of our life is the goal. And of course, as soon as you embrace that as your primary objective in living, not to say that you don't also want to live long and well, but that you see the two are intricately connected, that to live a long life requires that you thrive. And to thrive requires that you have a life's purpose that is an objective that's current in your life. You're not waiting to thrive for you to get the job you always wanted, or to move to the town you always wanted to live in, or to get married, or to have a child, or to be a grandparent and get rid of your children. You're not waiting. You're doing it now because you realize there's this one precious life you have. There's nothing you can take for granted. And every moment you're thinking and awake and alert, you have this opportunity to generate this positive energy. And I just want to encourage people to see how doing that now will help them in all ways, including how their body does.
Excellent. So the other thing too is like what you're saying is don't have your main goal just living to 120. Live right now. Live right now. Right.
Yeah. And you don't have to give up on 120. I wouldn't suggest people to do that. I think it's a metric. If people live to 120, it says something that they're doing is correct. But imagine living to 120 and having an extra 30 years and just aimlessly wandering around. I mean, how many parties do you want to go to? How many, it's nice to be on the beach and see beautiful sunrises and sunsets. But to me, it has to be coupled with meaning and purpose. I want to share that with other people. I want to write stories. I want to raise and influence children. I want to take care of the planet. Any number of things. If you want extra days for those things, well, power to you.
Yeah, like when we were talking just before we came on the show, I asked you what you were doing, and you're on the go. Okay, so we know you're on the go, and even your Christmas, like it's full, right? And mine is full, but it's a different full, right? So we're doing something different, but it's not about retiring, and it's not about chasing yourself or chasing your tail. It's about finding your purpose and finding your passion, which you'll know if you're doing it, because if you're doing it, you're going to find that serving is better than getting.
Right.
So,
Another thing you could do, so many people um, complain about not having energy, not sleeping well, not feeling well rested. In general, when you're doing what you love, you're plugged into an energy source that really does shift how you feel. Now, of course, there are other things that can compete with that. You can have ailments and things that bring you down. But in general, when you are plugged into what serves you, meaning and through you, you're serving others, you usually are tapped into a very powerful energy source. And that's why I think it is a remedy for a lot of chronic conditions, which is to couple whatever you're doing for yourself, the needs you have for your own self healing, with your service to others as best
beautiful.
as can be done under the circumstances.
Beautiful. So now we've got Scott from Instagram. Okay, Scott, and he lives in Texas. Do you think it gets harder as we get older to rewire our brains and change our thoughts? Is it ever too late? Thanks for the amazing information.
Um, I was sort of smiling maybe when I heard that question because I actually think paradoxically it's easier as we get older. And that may not be everyone's experience. But I'm going to use a couple of examples. Typically, as people age, they lose certain acuity, like their visual acuity, their hearing acuity. Um, it's just things that do age and change, and we wind up wearing glasses and hearing aids. That's sort of typical. But just think about that for a second. Just think about your eyesight changing. So when you're young, you don't need glasses. You could look out at a forest and you can see the bird in the tree far away, and you can identify what kind of bird it is. Maybe it's a hawk, maybe it's an eagle, maybe it's a robin, whatever. You're so clear in your vision, you could see that. And everywhere you look, you get really pinpoint accuracy in everything that you see. As you get older, you can't tell if it's a robin or a cardinal or whatever. So now you're obligated to see the whole forest. Because you can't see acuity any longer, you're now taking in a vista that's broader. I think that's the metaphor for aging that we should look at and think about. It coincides, interestingly enough, with our focus in terms of when we think of the word productivity, what we do when we're 20, 30, 40 years old, we're working, taking care of our family often. We have the body to do physical labor if that's what we're doing. When we're 70, 80, we can't work as many hours. We can't lift as heavy an objects. And so we're obligated to sit around a little bit more. But what can we do? We can tell stories. We could share our 50, 60, 70 years of experience with the 20-year-olds. And we could teach, we could share, we could influence, inspire. And that's very meaningful. And so it's another purpose of life altogether. When we live in a society and a culture that is fearful of death, fearful of aging, where we marginalize older people. And so, of course, there is something of fear. If I get to be old enough, I can't drive, well, my kids are going to put me in a nursing home. That's actually pretty sad to think about. I know I would resist that quite a bit also. But there are some sweet aspects of aging if we look at it that way. And so much of this is how we frame our minds and what we frame as loss or gain. There's always something to gain. I've seen people at the end of their lives, the last day of their lives, because as a young physician in hospitals late at night, one of the things you do, I actually call it a privilege, have learned from people like that. And I've seen people in the last day of their lives figure something out that they did not really get for however long they were living. And it was like magic happened for them. It was the epitome of living experience. It was the moment that things came together, and it's never too late.
Excellent. Linda from California and from YouTube. What does your dream look like for the future of medicine? That's the first part. What what does a healthy planet and population living to their fullest potential look like to you? You might have answered that. I don't know. And the last part, this is a longer one. Do you think we will ever come close?
To my dream. Um, yeah. So, as I usually do, I'll start from the end back. Yes, I think we're going to get there. We have this incredible consciousness. It's not to say that on the way, we're not going to still witness losses and disturbance in our ecosystem and that people are not going to be in pain and suffer. Unfortunately, that seems to be just the human condition. But one of the things about the human condition that's interesting is that we're aware of all of that. And people learn from that. And even though there are many people who are throwing it away and not taking care of things like the planet, I think most people are these days. And I think social media and all of this way we connect now is elevating the voices of those who care like this. And so I really believe that consciousness is going to win the day. I don't know when that's going to happen, as I sort of said before. My vision, though, of the planet um, is um, is one where there's much greater balance and wholeness, where there's tremendous respect and regard for all life. I think that that existed in the past. Let's again refer to the Native Americans, indigenous people that were on the continents you and I are. Um, I think they revered all life. They were not free from all forms of suffering, but there was something about the way they lived their lives on that road, as I pointed out, of medicine and a way of living that was really in harmony. And that's my dream, to get back there. And I, again, I trust the more people think about that and start practicing that in their homes, the more likely it's going to happen and happen soon. And I'm not going to be surprised when it happens.
Excellent. Okay. So, Lori from Facebook, can Dr. Can Dr. Finkelstein discuss light receptors in the gut and exposures to different colors of light? Thank you.
Yeah. So yesterday, I shared a little bit about biophotons, the particle that's produced whenever a chemical reaction occurs or whenever something moves. Like I move my arm, obviously there's a lot of chemical reactions that are in the cells that are operating my left arm. But the physical movement itself generates electromagnetic currents. Um, and we call it electromagnetic. You know, people have heard that phrase, but essentially what that is a light wave. All energy, all electromagnetic waves, starting from slow waves of sound to the fastest waves, gamma radiation, and what's in between, which is the visible spectrum of light that helps us see colors, all different frequencies of energy. And our body produces many different types of energy depending on what's going on. We could have a word in our mind, like love, and there'll be an energy production of our body because our thoughts generate energy release from the cells. The specific question about the gut, the gut is very interesting. It's not only our body that makes up the gut, but a lot of microorganisms that essentially have a body and that has genetics, nuclear material, enzymes, mitochondria. There's a lot of chemical reactions in the 400 trillion organisms that live in our body. That's a big number. And they're all producing light. We're producing light. And there's a resonance. It's like an orchestra there. There's all sorts of different light waves. And the more coherent it is, the more beautiful the music is. And I really mean that metaphorically. And so it's interesting, different conditions cause a disarray. And part of it is what we think. So other words like war is another word, and that produces a different form of energy. And things like that produce inflammation or infectious diseases are physical properties that produce energy. So when there's disarray, there's different ways of returning that system that's become imbalanced into balance. And so the question about light treatment and different waves of light is interesting because depending on the condition, there are different frequencies of light you can apply to the system to neutralize the condition. So just think of noise canceling headphones. You're on an airplane, there's all this buzz and noise in the airplane. It's pretty loud, it's pretty annoying. You can't really pick it out yourself, it's not music. It's sort of like an annoying hum. It's complex sound. It's a lot of different sound waves all the time. But now they've developed these noise canceling headphones. So you put this thing on, and how does it work? Well, the waveform of the hum is one way, and the noise canceling headphone first reads the signal that's out there in the plane, and then it produces a counter current so that the combination of the wave with the counter current basically collapses the wave. It creates a neutral state where it's now silent. Well, the same thing can occur in the body. If you have a condition where there's a wave disturbance, because light is produced, and there's a way to register what that is, and you offer the counter current light wave, you can neutralize some of the signal.
Excellent. Jennifer from Edmonton, and this is off of YouTube. Mental health conditions and substance abuse is drastically on the rise in our culture. What is your advice for people dealing with mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, and addiction? And her second part to this is, why do you believe that the suicide rate is going up in the youth?
Well, these are extraordinary signs and symptoms of societal problems. There's a lot to be said for what could cause this. Let's just say in a nutshell, it's the accumulated effects of all sorts of toxic things, materials, pollution, but words, anger, hostility, war, hatred, persecution, abuse. These all lead sensitive beings to states of fear and anxiety. And we're immersed in this biofield that's not only what we generate to put into the field, but what others around us generate and put into the field. And so collectively, the field is filling with things that are really challenging us, bombarding us. And people are different. Some people have more or less tolerance for that. But for those who are more sensitive or who have been particularly hurt by one or more of those factors, may break down in certain areas. There's a lot of reasons, some of which are scientific, like genetics, some of which are environmental. But when you see the collective rise in these conditions, then you have to think that this is something that definitely is environmental and is definitely changing how people are doing in the world today. So when you think of conditions that might have labels like depression, anxiety, suicide, or suicidal ideation, these are symptoms of what's going on. And not everyone who has them, by the way, these are words, and not everyone who's depressed is exactly the same. They're basically large categories, and that's one of the things I learned in medicine that I didn't really like is that you lump people together, you give them a diagnosis, they share a diagnosis, they have the same one, but they're not the same people. That's why the same treatment doesn't work for those two people very often, because they're not the same. Though the word and the diagnosis are the same. So part of the answer to the question then is people have to be looked at as individuals as well as seeing the general condition. But to reframe it, to see it as a system that's bombarded and to think about all the different things that bombard that system for that individual and try to sort them out. It's, I don't want to simplify it and use an analogy of something, silly, but I'm going to venture there with an apology because you can't reduce mental health, serious mental health issues to how cluttered my garage can get. But when my garage is cluttered, like yours is, it may be cluttered with 500 different things. To clean it out, I basically I can't just decide I'm just going to take out the paper that's in the garage. and I don't care if there's a whole bunch of other stuff. I've got to really think about whatever is in that garage. I've got to remove and reorganize. And so this is what compels me to have learned a more holistic approach, which is how to do a better diagnostics on what's going on for people, and to see that's the first half of it. And then with that, to see that it doesn't always have to be the medical institution that's going to have the answers. A lot of the cleanup, the reorientation, has to do with what I drew in my book, which I call the Slow Medicine Wheel of Health, which is a 7 sort of petaled flower, you could say. And the 7 petals represent different arenas of our world, our life, like our physical body, our mental body, our relationships with people, a relationship with nature, community, our life's purpose, and relationship to the divine. Those are the 7 areas. But what I like to do is help people see that the whole is dependent on the quality and the health of each of those individual parts. And I think that that applies to people who are suffering from mental health issues. And part of it, though, to be clear, is the people around them, the health and well-being of the people around them. Nobody is in a vacuum. We live together. We're social beings. And so when somebody is suffering, I look at the entire house. I look at the environment of the house. I look at the well-being of the people. And I do whatever I can to influence all people in that environment to take better care of themselves, because the synergy of the whole will make a difference, especially on a person who's very sensitive in the midst of all of that.
Yeah, it's
It's a
true.
complicated question and
It is.
not a simple answer, but I want people to think about, let's reframe the question. When we say depression, what do we really mean? When we say somebody is thinking of ending their life, what do we really mean? In the sense of, what does it imply, and where do we have access to sort of improving the conditions? People are longing for love. They're longing for connection. They're longing for meaning. When they don't have those, they go to things that soothe them. And sometimes they get spun off into their own interior world. Sometimes they get caught up in substances. Those are reactions for a person who's hurting. And I think we have to be compassionate and sensitive, really care, and with that care, really think carefully about what's going on.
Absolutely. All right. So now we have Melanie from Facebook. Melanie lives in Maine, and she says, in your practice, how do you get your patients to integrate this new approach into their daily lives when they are transitioning from the chaotic standard American diet and lifestyle?
Okay. You know, I sort of want to break it down for people. I want them to think about just taking one step at a time. The first thing is to do a good assessment of where you are. So let's say embedded in the question is, I've got a goal to be healthier. I've got a goal to really thrive and be in better balance. Just to start off with, there's dozens of different diets that can get you there. I don't think that there's one. So diet, as important as it is, it came, because it was mentioned in the question, I think has to be addressed. We have to clean up our diets. We have to understand how powerful that is. But it's not like there's one obvious diet for everybody. But it's definitely a category. But before we start on what to do, we need to understand 2 things: where we are and really where we're going. And I mentioned this yesterday. If we don't have a clear sense of what health is for us, what's it going to look like? The question that was asked just a little while ago about my dream. Everyone has a dream. Everyone has an image, an idea, or could, if they haven't thought about it for a while, come up with a vision for themselves or for their immediate world of what it would look like to be thriving. And a serious look at that, not just, I could go out and have a party every night and I'm playing all the time. I don't think that that's, quite honestly, as important as playing is. I don't think it's serious to think about that that's the objective, just to be able to have this, fun life. Although I think we should have fun and I think we should be happy, I think we have to have more than that. So we have to develop a good picture of what it really looks like. A certain amount of fun, a certain amount of work, a certain amount of service, a certain amount of peace and tranquility, a certain amount of relationships to things outside of ourselves. And we have all of those things as a vision. Then I think we need to do a good assessment of where we are. So we know where we want to go. Now we got to see how far away are we from there. and to be an honest look at ourselves. That's when we look at our diet. That's when we look at our rest. That's when we look at our relationships. That's when we look at how we take care of our body. That's when we look at, whether our job feels meaningful. That's when we look at whether our relationships are serving us or some of them need to change. That's when we have to deal with our mental state, not necessarily mental health, but our tendency for anger, or how caught up we get in frustration or fear. We take a good inventory without judgment of ourselves. We have to be very careful. This is not about giving ourselves low grades. It's just to make things better. We have to know where they really are. Once you have where you are and where you're going well set, then you can come up with sort of a practical approach to get there. And then I would just basically say, start with the easiest thing first. Sometimes it's not your diet. Sometimes it's not quitting smoking, even though you got to do both of those. Sometimes it's just getting outside every day, just reading some good books for a change, turning off the TV and the sounds of other people who are spewing inflammatory words. Sometimes it's about expressing yourself through art or some other place to unload some of the internal congestion. Eventually, you're going to have to get to how you take care of your body and how you take care, what you feed yourself. But sometimes before you have the energy to do those discipline stuff, you're going to need to find some additional energy from cleaning out some of the places that are a little congested. You might start with just clearing your car. The back seat of your car would just fill with all sorts of stuff. You'll feel so much lighter tomorrow if you just cleaned out the garage and cleaned out your car and cleaned out some of your closets. There's something to be said for building up slowly, but starting with the principle that we need energy to do the big things, and maybe not start with the big things, but know you need to get there, because that's the path you've now basically drawn, the plan, the map for yourself from where you are to where you're going. So you know where you're going to wind up. You just don't have to do it all at once. Sometimes people are overwhelmed, demoralized, and wind up in a state of inertia because they just think it requires too much all at once, and then they just get defeated before they even step outside.
Yeah, hesitation, eh? It'll get
Yes.
you. So, you either, when hesitation comes, you stay in the present moment, or you go back into your protocol and you find yourself doing what you've always done. So, Krista from Ohio, and this is from Facebook. Why do you think it is that many medical doctors are so resistant to the idea of integrative and alternative medicine? And then, why do you think more medical doctors haven't come to the same realization and change that you have?
Yeah. Now, that's a frustration I think a lot of people share. I know I did. I was one of those resistant people, though. I remember being in my medical practice before I got wind of this, practicing what I had learned in medical school. And I remember this, lovely woman who was about 75 at the time, who was from Great Britain. And she was going back to London to see a doctor there to get homeopathic remedies for her heart condition. And she told me she was going to do that. And I remember vividly saying to her, her name was Grace, I said, Grace, I'm offering you like the best stuff. Why would you take, this? I didn't even know what homeopathy was really at the time. Why would you take this stuff that is nothing? And it was a terrible thing that in retrospect, I said to somebody, but I think it echoes the sentiment in the question, which is that doctors start off being trained to not respect other systems of health and healing. And that's pretty old. That probably goes back to the 1920s when the Flexner Report was released. Basically, the AMA got the Congress to say that nobody in the United States could be licensed to practice medicine who didn't go to an American medical school. That's summarizing it, but it's to the essence of it. And of course, then that just sort of put on the fringe immediately many other practitioners of health and healing that were established at that point, including chiropractic, eclectic medicine, there was just a lot of different approaches. Naturopathy, even though it wasn't called naturopathy at the time, people practicing nature-based medicines, healing arts, indigenous medicine, all these were operating simultaneously, and people had access to most of them. But this then disqualified, or basically allowed, physicians to start to say in public, "It's me or nobody. I'm the person you can trust. You can't trust anyone else." And they started to talk about the scientific method and evidence-based medicine, and it has led to where we are today. Largely, is this prejudice. So when you're in medical school, you largely get that, even though you might get a couple of rotations in things like nutrition. Some medical schools talk about integrative medicine. People now, just because you've got to be in a cave somewhere if you haven't heard of acupuncture or Chinese medicine or even Ayurveda these days, Indian medicine, or to be senseless enough not to realize that there are people all over the planet that are not going to traditional doctors, and that they're doing okay. There's still an arrogance and an ignorance. But the ignorance is not just because people weren't taught. There's almost an enforced ignorance, a fear of leaving the nest, the little bubble of Western medicine, for fear that you're going to lose status. And there's a competitive agenda in terms of business. And then there's the pharmaceutical industry that is very powerful and promotes a method. We're all, as individuals, we're all up against this. On the level of a physician, I think there are a lot of good doctors out there. There are a lot of good people. But as an institution, I think this is what we're facing. There's a lot of commercial drive to keep this alive. But fortunately, because of the internet, social media, people are aware there's an alternative way of doing a lot of things. And they're seeking it because they're becoming quite familiar with the ills and side effects and the problems associated with Western medicine, and the fact that sometimes it just doesn't work. And sometimes the science today is disproven tomorrow, in which case it leads you to question science to begin with as the bottom line, absolute determinant of what works or what doesn't work. So I think doctors are subject to a lot of these forces, and as a result, what they say publicly and often in their practices dismisses the important consideration for alternatives, particularly the alternative of how you take care of yourself between doctor's visits. That's just not something most doctors talk about. Yeah, they say take care of yourself, eat well, do exercise, stop smoking. We all learned that. That's all true. But they're not necessarily helpful or motivational in the way they speak about it, because the questions that have come up tonight, as an example, is, well, what are the steps to do that? And in a doctor's visit that lasts 12 minutes, there's not enough time to go over that. So it's much easier for me to write a prescription for you and just take away your headache than talk to you for another 20 minutes about why you have 10 headaches every month. So there are these problems. I want to correct them. I want to reach out to my medical colleagues and show them there are other ways that are legitimate and that work. And when they're most motivated? When they're sick. When they're sick, they start to say, because they know their own procedures and pills have problems. That's when they often start to get curious. And I don't wish it upon physicians to get sick, but it turns out when they do get sick, sometimes that's when they wake up.
I hear you.
That's how I would answer that question.
Well, you did a great job, I'll tell you that much. All right, so Jeremy from YouTube, and he lives in California. What are your thoughts on the growing epidemic of Lymes disease? Can you talk a bit about your approach to dealing with this condition? And boy, these questions are long. And do you actually believe that everybody who's getting diagnosed with Lyme disease actually has it?
Okay. Lyme disease is an epidemic. I'll give you sort of an answer that wasn't necessarily part of the question, but I think in the United States, with 330 million people, so I know you're in Canada yourself, and so there's a whole bunch of Canadians listening too, and it's probably a similar statistic, and people from all over the world, because Lyme disease is now spread over the world. But what I know best is the United States epidemiologically. It is estimated that 90% of Americans have Lyme disease. 90%. That means 300 million people. Now, what does that mean? They have Lyme disease. Well, they're not sick. Let's put it that way. but they have been infected. And if you were to be able to do a accurate test, because I think that's another issue here with Lyme disease, is that the testing, the medical testing, the laboratory testing is fraught with both false negative and false positive results and limited sensitivity, meaning the blood tests and analysis are not good enough to really be able to black and white, at least with that type of technology, say people have or don't have Lyme disease. But my estimate is, because Lyme is not just transmitted by the tick, that was what we were taught in 1975 when it was first diagnosed or became known as a disease, even though the Lyme organism is thousands of years old, and there's histories all over the world, particularly in Europe, for Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the organism, to have infected humans. The Iceman, by the way, who was crossing the Alps, who sort of died several thousand years ago, whose body was found somewhat intact, had Lyme disease. So it's been around for a long time. But the epidemic that we're seeing now, where people are not just getting monoarthritis, like a swollen knee, but they're getting systemic infection and other things, has taken off since 1975. And there's a longer story behind that I'll share with you maybe another time, because I don't want to get too far downstream. But suffice it to say that it's not the same disease it used to be. It's far more problematic. And it's not just transmitted by a tick, as we originally said, but that it seems to be transmitted by mosquitoes, and it can be transmitted by other insects, vectors, as well as human-to-human sexual transmission. And that's why 300 million people might have Lyme disease. Not because all those people were bitten by ticks. Clearly, they don't all have the classic bullseye rash. But if it's transmitted, like a lot of infections are, through body chemistry, one person to another, given the virulence of this organism, it seems likely, and when tested in certain ways, it seems quite evident that people have Lyme disease. When you take the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease, okay, it sort of sounds like an unrelated condition, and you do autopsies of the brain of Alzheimer's disease, you'll see that 90% of people with Alzheimer's disease have evidence of spirochetal Lyme organisms in their brain, which is consistent with that number of 90%. And so could Lyme disease be the causative agent of a lot of these neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, ALS, MS, autism in children, ADD, ADHD in children? Quite possibly important, because it's a neurological condition. What's interesting about Lyme disease is that it tends not to be just one organism that infects people. Even though Lyme was defined by this particular outbreak of a funny rash in children in Lyme, Connecticut in 1975, it seems now that there are co-infections that come hand in hand with the bite initially and the infection. Other parasites, other bacterium, viruses, and that those people who tend to get sickest and wind up with chronic syndromes have other problems associated with their immune system, often from toxicity from the world around them, heavy metals, chemicals, glyphosate, the damage that glyphosate causes in the gut, in particular, leaky gut syndrome, leading to all sorts of immune deficiency states. Lyme promotes an immune deficiency state. And just as an example, when you're really sick with Lyme, your antibody production for the Lyme antibody will be diminished because it impairs your immune response. So a negative Lyme test could be quite consistent with very severe Lyme disease. That's the paradox. And that's part of the reason why Lyme testing is not very useful. The treatment protocol is similar to how I answered the question about depression and mental health. One needs to look at the entire array of that human being, of what's going on in their system, in their matrix, as I described last night, in this extracellular space. What's all the gunk clogging them up, and why is their immune system impaired? Not just kill the organisms, but sort of engage the immune system to create a state of renewed health and vitality so that the person can correct themselves. It's probably a combination of two. Let's get rid of organisms, but also let's build up the human being. And that's the general approach to treatment that I offer.
Beautiful. So, just on a side note, I'll be mentioning this again, but we're going to have Dr. Michael Finkelstein back in the new year, and we're going to dive into this Lyme disease situation And already, can't you tell with just this one answer he gave on how informative he's got it? And we're going to really lay it out for you. And then we're going to allow people, because I'll tell you something, it is an epidemic, and people are really confused out there. So let people know and watch for this show in the new year, because if you need answers, you want answers, and especially Lyme's is very confusing to people. I mean, everybody's coming up with different ideas, and I think that we can see that Dr. Finkelstein is more than aware about what he's talking about. So let's go on to the last question that we have, and that's from Celeste. And this is again from Facebook, and she lives in Delaware. How much do you think stress is linked to aging? Can you talk about your approach to aging gracefully? I'm 80 years old. I feel well, but in the last couple of years, my health has been declining very quickly.
Yeah. Well, I think stress, is a little word, but it's a big issue. um, in a nutshell, we're suffering from stress. And the way stress affects us, it's inflammatory. It creates in us this unconscious fight or flight response. So before I get too deep into that, some stress, some things that motivate us are beneficial. You know, if you're, sort of feeling stress because you're, late for an important appointment, and that important appointment, as an example, is meeting your grandchild, and it's the love of your life, and it's so meaningful to both of you. Uh, well, it's good to get you going so that you get out of your house and you get to where, get there. That's stress, but in a sense, it's motivating you to do something very positive in your life. And so there's ways of looking at stress, and it's not all bad. But I think, Celeste, your question really is about when stress, is flowing over, when it's spilling over the top of the cup, when your ability to handle it, and it's all sorts of different types of stress, exceeds your capacity to digest it. And it's not all for the productive, beautiful moments of your life. Some of the stress is just from the pollution and the toxicity in our immediate environment. So I like people to start there. Think about your home, clear it out, clean it up. Think about electromagnetic fields and Wi-Fi and all these currents and lights, and make sure you're living in rhythm. Get outside every day. Some people lose touch with basic things like that. That makes a big difference for stress. Just as an example, make sure you're sleeping well. That's not the easiest thing to do. It's easy to say. Um, Blackout curtains, going to bed at a reasonable time, writing lists before you go to bed so you unload your mind, doing creative writing and expression, taking a hot bath so that you could get yourself relaxed. Whatever techniques you need, sleep is so vital to that also. But then I do think when stress accumulates, it's going to wear us out, and it's going to facilitate the processes that we might say are contributing to the experience of aging. Um, and so we want to slow that down. So we want to, again, look at something like my 7-flowered petaled wheel of health, and think of all those different areas and trying to find better balance in each of those areas. And that's how I think you become in better shape with however the wind blows. The idea is that we're never going to live our lives free from the challenges, but when they happen, we recover faster and we can handle more. We have to, basically realize we need to prioritize. We can't deal with everything. And one of the things that I notice that tends to stress people out, that accumulates with age, is that we keep carrying the load with us all along. We never clean out the bag that we've been carrying on our back. So we've got stuff in there we've been doing for 20 years, but we no longer really need to do it. And so a review of where I spend my time, where I place my energy is in order, and lighten your load, I think is a very good way to begin this process. And I think when you get lighter, you'll feel freer, you'll have more energy, your body will take care of itself, your mind will rest, and I think it'll reverse the cycle a little bit. There's more to say on the subject. It's a critical question. But yes, when it's not handled well, we can feel worn out, older, And we will break down at a faster rate than we would like to. So in general, that type of stress motivates us to attend to it. And I think the issue then is, can we get some good advice and guidance to do it well, so we're not wasting our time, wasting our money, and we can target what's really important for us to do to deal with that.
Thank you. So, Doctor, where would I get your book, Slow Medicine?
Wherever you buy books, so Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. Um, if you have a hard time there, people can write to me. I've got a stack in my closet. Michael at slowmedicinedoctor.com. And it's pretty straightforward. I've recorded the audiobook, so you don't even need to get it in print. You can just listen to my voice if it's not too grating, and enjoy my own take on my own work. It's something that I'm excited about because I think it is a blueprint for health. It's not prescriptive. I'm not telling people what to do. I'm just giving them sort of questions to ponder so they can figure it out for themselves. Along the way, of course, I give some suggestions, but I think there's a lot of options, and it's up to people themselves to take good care. And that's what I want to encourage.
Beautiful. So, what do you think about in the new year? We'll do a show on aging and one on Lyme's disease. Does that sound good?
I think they're perfectly relevant to
Okay.
our world today. Yep.
Okay. So look at what you got looking forward to, because we've got a brilliant man here with a big heart, and that's kind of obvious. And I just want to thank you, Dr. Michael Finkelstein, for joining me today, and thank you to everyone who watched today's show. But before we leave, I would like to ask Dr. Finkelstein, what would you like to leave everybody with? And you know what? The year's ending. We're only like about 6 weeks away. What would you like to say to everybody?
Well, I think one of the things that sort of sparks and it starts the holiday season, you might say, is the holiday in the U.S. and of Thanksgiving. I don't think we have to wait until Thanksgiving to be grateful, and that's the point. I think if we can keep focusing on what we're grateful for and fill our mind and our energy field and sort of allow that biophotonic light energy that we're going to create when we think that way to penetrate not only our being, but the world around us. That visualization, that practice is what's going to lead to the tipping point that we discussed earlier. And it will serve the person who's doing it, because it feels so good to just be in that state, immersed in gratitude and love and appreciation. And of course, it's going to serve everyone around you. And I would say, let's just do that every day. Let's just make that a plan, not wait for New Year's to make a resolution, but to resolve to take better care of ourselves, starting with appreciation.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. You know what? Every morning I wake up, I just go, wow, I'm still here. And you know what? That what created the universe decided to create me. And I don't know. That's enough gratefulness for me to get me going and get me motivated. Thank you again, Michael. I really appreciate everything. And everybody, check out his Slow Medicine. Make sure you check his book out and read it, because we'll be back here in the new year with him. And like I said, we're going to be talking about aging, not just gracefully, but thriving while we age. And then we're going to be talking about Lyme's disease, okay? The whole story, not just part of the story. All right? And everybody, make a note, everyone. Every Monday and Friday, when I'm not traveling, at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, we have a live Doc Talk Q&A where all your questions will be answered live and in person. We will give you the most powerful personal take action steps to all your questions that no one else seems to be able to answer, except Dr. Michael Finkelstein. You can join us live on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Doc of Detox Show. Every show is time-stamped on YouTube for you, so you can go straight to your question, okay? And for everybody out there, we had a couple people send in questions that weren't really pertaining to the show. And one of them was, when is the next course? Yes, this one is almost over here in Kelowna. The next course is in San Antonio, Texas, and it's the beginning of February. You can go to itioh.com to take a look at that information. All right? Please let your friends and family know they now have a choice. Become the master of your life and the light of your family. Please leave a like on this show if you enjoyed what was discussed. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and click on the notification bell to never miss a show. And all I'd like to say to everyone is, guess what? 3, 2, 1. You got this. God bless everyone. Have a great night. And thank you again, Dr. Michael Finkelstein.
My pleasure.
If you're looking for life-saving and life-changing information, well, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to click and subscribe. Stay connected.